Today we are going to discuss about the costing for a merchandiser. As many of you are working as a merchandiser in the apparel companies, we are going to discuss about costing for a merchandiser. The base of the costing is same as the previous lecture. In our previous lecture, we discussed about the product cost. If you can remember, product cost. Product cost includes number one, direct materials cost. Number two, direct labor cost. And number three is manufacturing overhead. These are the three components of product cost. Product cost is also known as manufacturing cost. So when as a merchandiser you negotiate the price with the buyer, you usually use this type of costing format. This is the costing format usually used by the merchandisers. The common information here is that fabric cost or FOB. Number one is fabric cost. Number two is if there are more than one product. Fabric content, fabric port, yarn count, weight and width, with cost or yard or kg, consumption yard or kg. So if you relate with our costing, these are the name of the materials. These are the name of the materials. In our cost management, we define this component as the direct materials. Fabric is a direct material. So can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So fabric is a direct material. Ultimately, this is about fabric and fabric specifications. Then you include accessories. Accessories are also direct materials. And what is the definition of direct materials? If you can remember, direct materials means the materials which can be traced with the finished output. Fabric we can trace. The button here, the button we can trace. This is known as the direct materials. So fabric is direct materials. Trims and accessories is also direct materials. And the different types of trims and accessories are given here. And then other services, support services. Say for example, testing, local transportation, fabric trim, documentation, actual CM overheads. Here the differences are coming from here. In our analysis, we say that direct materials up to this point from here to there, these are all direct materials. These are all direct materials because these materials you can trace with the finished output. And the second component, this is ultimately we discuss in a different way. What is the different way? We classify product cost into three classes. One is direct materials is over. And the second one is direct labor. So we will analyze here direct labor. Here, actually, this is explained as the CM, cost of making, labor cost, direct materials cost. And how this have been calculated, how actual CM is calculated. Actual CM is calculated by multiplying SMB and cost of SMB per minute. That means cost of making per minute. Here the cost of SMB is given in per minute. That means at a factory, what is the per minute cost of making a product? Here making ultimately means direct labor charge. And what we usually do, first we calculate the SMB, standard minute value, and then we multiply by cost per minute of the factory, and where this type of information is available to the HR department, because HR department records all the human resource requirements, labor information is available to them. So human resource department can say what is the cost per minute. The accounting department also keeps records of the cost of the factory per minute. So if you know that to produce a product, it requires 5 minutes. It requires 5 minutes. SMB means standard minute value. Standard minute value to produce a product. So here what we are dealing with, product costs, because this is ultimately the cost sheet the merchandisers in our country are using. And how the cost sheet is prepared? Number one, you include the direct materials, you include the direct labor, and direct labor means here actual CM. And how we get CM? By multiplying per minute cost and standard minute value. And maybe the question arises how to calculate standard minute value. There is a system of calculating standard minute value we are going to show you. But before that, is it clear to you that what we are dealing with? We are dealing with product costs. And product cost will have direct materials, will have direct labor, and direct labor is actual CM, and manufacturing overhead. Third component is manufacturing overhead. And overhead, especially this overhead rate, is predetermined. Predetermined means that the company sets a rate at the beginning of the year. What will be the manufacturing overhead? Manufacturing overhead means indirect materials, indirect labor, and all other expenses in the factory. Say, for example, electricity bill. During product costing, this cost sheet is prepared to negotiate with the buyers. So you do not know how much electricity bill will be there, how much depreciation will be there, how much other indirect materials will you need. That's why, based on the previous year's manufacturing overhead, company determine a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. It is the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. What is overhead? Overhead, predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. This cost will be applicable per unit. Per unit manufacturing overhead cost is 0, 1. So in a cost sheet, only the product cost is sufficient. Don't you think that when you will negotiate with the buyer, you have to consider the operating expenses or non-manufacturing cost or pre-act cost? What is operating expenses? What is non-manufacturing cost? Or what is pre-act cost? So cost can be product cost, pre-act cost. Cost can be manufacturing cost, non-manufacturing cost. Cost can be non-operating cost and operating cost. So operating cost, pre-act cost, and non-manufacturing costs are same. And product cost, manufacturing cost, and especially these two types, product cost and manufacturing cost are same. So this component is dealing with the product cost up to direct materials, up to direct labor, up to manufacturing overhead. These are known as the product cost. So when you will set the price, you have to think about the pre-act cost or non-manufacturing cost. What is pre-act cost or non-manufacturing cost or operating cost? So marketing department is there. They are not producing the goods. So marketing department expenses you have to include. HR department is there in the company. So you have to include the HR department's cost. So other than the manufacturing cost, all other cost is known as operating cost. Other than product cost, all expenses in the company is non-manufacturing cost, operating cost, or pre-act cost. Same, these are same. So when you negotiate with the buyer, you have to think about the operating cost, non-manufacturing cost, and also pre-act cost. That means the cost that is incurred in other departments other than the manufacturing department or production department or factory department. Factory is production department of the company. So production department cost other than the factory is known as operating cost, non-manufacturing costs. And operating cost is especially divided into two classes. One is known as sales and distribution expenses, and other is known as administrative expenses. Administrative expenses means expenses of the administration of the company, including HR department, accounts department, finance department, compliance department, and sales and distribution cost is related with sales and distribution of the product. Sales and distribution of the product. So you have to include those costs in your cost sheet. So here there is a limitation that I don't find specifically the operating cost or non-manufacturing cost or administrative cost and sales and distribution cost is given here, but as a merchandiser you have to know in details. So that's why your assignment is that you will develop a standard cost sheet that will include operating expenses. It is your assignment. So you will include operating expenses. Operating expenses means administrative expenses and sales and distribution expenses. Here, testing, local transportation and loading. Transportation and loading, this is marketing, operating cost. Fabric and trim handling and finance charge. This is also administrative cost. Documentation is also administrative cost. So administrative costs are given here, but not in a formal way, proper way. So you are going to prepare a cost sheet that will have all the information formally. And based on this cost sheet, you ultimately set the FOB cost is 3.10. So when you are going to negotiate with the buyer, you must have to keep in mind that 3.10 is your reservation point. Reservation point means that without 3.10 you cannot earn any profit. This is ultimately coverage of all the expenditure. So what about the profit? Will you not make any profit? So then once again you have to, in your cost sheet, you have to include profit. So without profit, you cannot sell your product. So total CM here is, it says these are all the CM. But actually, we have to calculate the different components of product cost and then period cost. If you check the annual report of a company, say for example, annual report of Square Textile. This is the annual report of the Square Textiles. So let's check. Go to the profit and loss statement. So here in your profit and loss statement, here, this is the consolidated statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income. You will find here, this is administrative overhead. This is about operating costs. This is selling and distribution. This is also operating cost. So these two costs are operating costs. These two costs are administrative expenses and selling and distribution expenses. This is known as the operating cost. And the product cost ultimately is included here in cost of goods sold. And how to calculate cost of goods sold? In cost of goods sold, you ultimately calculate the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Or in other words, cost of goods sold includes product cost. So this is about product cost and this is about operating cost. Two together is known as the operating cost. So now you can check note number 22, how it is product cost. Go to the note number 22. This is 22. Can you you know, can you see Raw materials
Yes, sir.
consumed.
Yes, sir.
Are you getting the point? This is raw materials consumed. That means direct materials. Also, more details is given here in 22.1. Open quantity was the material. Name of the materials is missing. Consolidated raw materials. All the raw materials is given here. So, raw materials consumed. Packaging materials consumed. That is, these are the direct materials. Factory overhead, manufacturing overhead. Are you getting? Then this is known as the cost of manufacturing. Then work in process. Work in process. This is known as the cost of production. Maybe now you are thinking that one component is missing. What is the component? Component is direct labor. Where is the direct labor? Here in this company, direct labor is reported as the administrative expenses because this labor and laborers in our country are considered as the employees. That means they paid monthly basis, not daily basis or hourly basis. That's why the labor cost is fixed here in Bangladesh. But if you go developed country, if you go France, Germany, Japan, United States, United Kingdom, you will find that the laborers are hourly paid. And I had chance to work in a company, and my payment was based on how many hours I was there in the office. So this raw materials and direct materials and factory overhead. Maybe we can check factory overhead whether labor charge is included here or not. 22.3. 20. Oh yes. Factory overhead. Under factory overhead, these charges are included. Why the charges are included? Because they are not paying hourly. Their charges are fixed almost. Factory overhead. So in systematic way, in international accounting standards, you have to report factory labor or direct labor separately. And all other expenses are manufacturing overhead, traveling and conveyance. This traveling is not the traveling of the managing director of the company. This traveling is related with the production department. Cost of goods sold is related with production. Overseas travel. This overseas travel is not the managing director or HR manager's travel. This travel is related to factory management. So these are all related with the factory, group insurance of the factory, spare parts factory, government taxes factory, production department, depreciation of the machines used in production factory. All right. So here cost of goods sold includes direct materials, direct labor and manufacturing overhead. This includes direct labor and manufacturing overhead. So this is known as the cost of production. Cost of production. So you have to reflect this in the real cost sheet that you are going to produce individually. So cost sheet, when you are going to prepare cost sheet, you have to show direct materials, you have to show direct labor, you have to show manufacturing overhead, you have to show operating expenses. One more thing is operating expenses here. What are the, what is operating expenses? Administrative overhead, salary and allowances. Salary and allowances is also here, isn't it? Salary and allowances. But this salary and allowances is for the production department employees. But here, salary and allowances are there. This salary and allowances are for the administrative people, marketing department's employees, the company's HR department employees, other department other than production department, all are summarized here. Director's remuneration, independent directors, honorarium, and traveling and conveyance. This traveling and conveyance are applicable for the marketing department, HR department, managing director, and this traveling and conveyance is related with production department only. Production department. So overseas training. So what you have to include? You have to include direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Then you have to include administrative expenses. What is the administrative expenses per unit? Maybe you cannot determine exactly. But the accounting department has their database. You can collect the data and you can assume that per unit administrative cost based on the previous year's data. So previous year's data, say for example, for this company is available here in the annual report. Overseas traveling, recruitment training, head office employees, free lunch, uniform, printing expenses, stationery expenses, software, postage, electricity. These are the administrative expenses, and another is sales and distribution expenses. This selling and distribution expenses. This is also one of the part of operating expenses, non-manufacturing expenses, period cost, export sales expenses, loading and unloading product. So when you are preparing cost sheet, you have to consider about these different classes, product cost and period cost. And now the question arises. The question arises that how to calculate SMB, because based on this SMB, you need to calculate the labor cost. Per minute labor cost will be multiplied by SMB. SMB means how many minutes will it take to produce a product? How many minutes will it take to finish a product? So this SMB calculation is important, and here we can see the SMB production or calculation technique. SMB, how to calculate SMB here. To calculate SMB, what you have to do, you have to your first job is to calculate the observed time. What is observed time? Observed time means that you will observe a job. Say for example, you are going to observe how long does it take to cut a shirt. So what you will do, you will use stopwatch, and you will put the stopwatch near the operator, and you will use it when the operator starts cutting, and you will stop it when the cutting will be over. So first time maybe it will take 1 minute. This is not the standard time. What you have to do, you have to take the measurement several times. This is known as summation over xi. That means sum of all the trials and divided by how many times you have taken the sample. Then you will get what? Observed time. Observed time. And this observed time is not the final. What you have to do, you have to use performance rating. Performance rating. Observed time will be multiplied by the performance rating. And when you will say, for an example, performance rating is the employee who is being observed. The cutting will be made by an employee. And you will multiply by the performance rating of the particular employee, because your performance rating and my performance rating is not same. Every employee's performance rating is different. So you will use the performance rating of that particular employee. So you will multiply observed time by the performance rating. Maybe performance rating is 80%. Then you will get the basic time. Basic time, or this is also known as normal time. This is known as basic time or normal time. What you will get? Normal time. And after getting the normal time, then don't you think there are some other allowances or problems in the factory? Raw material crisis, machine breakdown, employees going to the washroom. So maybe there is around 10% allowance. So you will add back that allowance. So normal time plus allowance is known as the standard time. Plus the allowance is the standard time. So this is an example. You are observing an employee's particular operation, and first time it takes 1.12 minutes to complete the job. Second time it takes 1.15 minutes. Third time it takes 1.16 minutes. Fourth time it takes 1.12 minutes. Fifth time it takes 1.15 minutes. So your average time, 5, sum of the 5 divided by 5. Sum of 5, 10.35, sum of these figures. 10.35 divided by, there are 9 samples. 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9. And total sum of these 9 samples is 10.35. So 10.35 divided by 9 is the observed time, OT. Observed time. That means on average, the operation takes 1.15 minutes time to finish the job. And the performance rating for that particular employee is 1.13. So you will multiply by 1.13. 1.15 observed time is multiplied by 1.13. And your normal time, and in garments factory especially, this is known as basic time. Basic time is 1.30. Now you will add allowances, and the allowances in the factory is on average 20%. 20%. So 20% of 1.30 is what? 0.26. Or you can multiply directly by 1.13 multiplied by 1.20. 20% is allowance and 1 indicates 1.3. So you can multiply by allowance factor. Allowance factor means 1 plus allowance rate, 0.20. And the summation or 1.10, you can use your calculator. The allowance time, allowance is 20%. What is the 20% of 1.30? It is 0.30. 0.26. So 1.30 plus 0.26 is 1.56. Or you can directly multiply 1.30 by 1.20. Other than addition, you will use multiplication. And it is the standard time. And standard time is known as SMV, standard minute value. Standard time in literature, this is known as standard time. And this standard time is known as standard minute value. So maybe you have got the idea how the SMV is calculated. And this per minute cost is available to the HR department. It is available to the accounts department, and this information are added. And this is how a cost sheet is prepared. So it is your assignment. You have to prepare the cost sheet. Cost sheet. All right. And now we are going to give a revision how you are going to make a standard cost sheet. So revision. So ultimately in your cost sheet, you ultimately calculate the price. Why you are calculating the price? Because the price will be used to negotiate with the buyer. So price equals manufacturing cost plus non-manufacturing cost plus markup. Markup means profit rate. What is your profit rate? So you have to, in your manufacturing cost, you have to calculate direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. And in your non-manufacturing cost, you have to include administrative expenses and sales and distribution expenses. And above all, above these two costs, you have to add some profit, because without profit, your company will not sustain. That's why markup addition is also very important. And you know about the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead definition. Direct materials, the materials which are directly traced with the finished output. And direct labor means the labor who are directly involved to produce this product. The gateman is not the direct labor, because the gateman, without him, production process can run. He is important for security. The general manager of the company is not the direct labor, because without him the production can continue. Production officer is direct labor, because without production officer the other employees will not work. So direct labor. And manufacturing overhead means all other costs. Electricity bill is also manufacturing overhead. Depreciation of the machines, manufacturing overhead. The gateman, indirect labor, is also manufacturing overhead. And say for example, you need to use grease in sewing machines. This you cannot trace grease in your finished output, but this materials is important. This is known as indirect materials, parts of the machines. This is also indirect materials, because the parts you cannot trace with the finished output. So direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, this is known as the product cost. This is known as the production cost. This is known as the manufacturing cost. Manufacturing cost. And direct materials, direct labor, we have already defined direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead cost. So this is also known as product cost. And there is another cost that is known as period cost. Period cost means operating cost. Operating cost means administrative cost, and sales and marketing cost. We have shown before you in the annual report, period cost. So product cost is ultimately reported as an expense, and the expense title is cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold. And period cost, so in sum, all cost, product cost, period costs. Manufacturing cost, non-manufacturing cost, direct materials cost, direct labor cost, and manufacturing overhead cost. and selling cost, administrative cost, as we have already explained and shown in our real report. And so this have been discussed before you in our previous lecture. If you can remember that, we already discussed about these issues. Now, the new issue today, we have already explained some issues, and some issues are here. Some issues are here. Say, for example, job order costing. Job order costing. So job order costing, costs are assigned to each job. Job order costing, there are two types of costing. One is known as job order costing, and another is known as process costing. In garments business, we do job order costing. Why we do job order costing? Because every job is specific. One job coming from H&M, job means order. One order coming from H&M, the specifications, materials, accessories are different. Another job is coming from H&M or M&S, the specifications, materials are different. So same company producing different orders, satisfying different customer satisfactions. It is known as order, job order. So costs are assigned to each job or base. So ultimately this this one. Say for example, this is one order, this is another order, this is another order, this is another order, this is another order, job order, and the everything is the raw materials, the labor cost, all are different, especially raw materials. So job order cost means costing for a specific job. A specific job. And in job order costing, you have to prepare job cost sheet. So in a job cost sheet, this is look like a standard job cost sheet given in your book, but you have to develop a job cost sheet that will include direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, and also this is product cost, and also administrative expenses and sales and distribution expenses to set the price. Because you have to negotiate with the buyer, and this, if you do not know your operating costs, sales and distribution expenses, administrative expenses, you cannot charge the buyer properly. You have to develop a cost sheet that will include operating expenses. Operating expenses means, once again, the expenses, those are not happening in the production department, outside of the production department. And factory of all the companies is known as production department. Say for example, Square Textiles has their factory. So that factory is known as the production department. So when you are bringing raw materials, when you are bringing anything date wise, you are recording in a job cost sheet. Raw materials, when you bring raw materials, when you bring, so for 1, 2, 3, 3 times you brought raw materials, so you will record the raw materials according to dates. And direct labor, you are giving maybe weekly labor charges. So this weekly labor charges are shown. In a month, 2 times you have given labor charge. So labor and overhead, you can record here. And if you go to the accounting department has real cost sheets. Maybe you are completing an order of H&M, M&S, or Zara, or Inditex. When you are bringing raw materials, you receive a raw materials requisition. This requisition is going to the accounting department. Accounting department ultimately record it in the computer system. So they're recording direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So in manufacturing overhead, you don't know about the depreciation charge. You don't know about the electricity charge. So you have to use a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. What you have to do? You have to use a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. How you will calculate the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? You can use the predetermined manufacturing overhead based on the previous year. Estimated annual overhead costs divided by annual operating activity. Say for an example, last year in your company, you have produced 1 million units and the total overhead cost was 1 million. So what will be the per unit overhead rate? 1 million divided by 1 million is equals 1. Isn't it? Or 100,000, your total overhead cost was 100,000 and your number of units produced during the year was also 100,000. So per unit overhead cost will be 1. This is known as predetermined overhead rate. Per unit overhead cost will be $1. Example is given here. Say for example, Wallace company uses direct labor cost as the activity base. So you can use direct labor as the activity base. Anything you can use. There I said that number of units. This is known as units of activities. Units of activity. How many units you have produced in a factory? Especially this is best for the textile and apparel company. Assuming that the company expects annual overhead cost to be 280,000 and direct labor cost for the year was 350,000. So 250 divided by 350 will be the overhead rate. 250 divided by 350, 80%. That means 80% of the labor cost is manufacturing overhead cost. So you can relate with the other cost of the company, or you can use per unit overhead cost. So manufacturing overhead rate is coming from, coming from the previous year's database. Manufacturing overhead rate is coming from the previous year's database. So after getting the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, you can complete the job cost sheet. Direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Total cost is 39,000 and the order quantity was 1,000. So 39,000 divided by 1,000 per unit production cost is 39 here. So what you have to do, you have to calculate the per unit production cost. Then you have to calculate the per unit operating cost. Then you have to negotiate with the buyer so that you are in a advantageous position. This is how you are going to prepare a question. Yes, now we are accepting your questions. So, Ms. Raha, are you with me?
জি স্যার, আমার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল যে আপনি ফার্স্ট থেকে যখন স্কয়ার টেক্সটাইলের এটা দেখাচ্ছিলেন স্যার, তো ওখানে স্যার আপনি যে বললেন আওয়ারলি স্যালারি আর হচ্ছে মান্থলি বেসিস স্যালারিটা যখন আমি হিসাব করতেছি স্যার, ওটা মানে আসলে পার্থক্যটা স্যার কি? মানে আমি বলতে চাচ্ছি যে আমরা যে ইনক্লুড করবো কস্ট শিটে, সেটা কিভাবে ইনক্লুড করবো? আওয়ারলি আর মান্থলি মানে ডিফারেন্সটা কি? আলটিমেটলি আমাকে তো স্যালারি দিতেই হবে, আই মিন কোম্পানিকে তো স্যালারি দিতেই হবে, আওয়ারলি দিলেও দিতে হবে এক্সপেন্স, আর মান্থলি দিলেও তো সেটা এক্সপেন্স।
Okay, thanks. So, especially in literature, the payment made in hourly basis is known as wages. And we will also discuss one more chapter that is known as variable cost and fixed cost. When you are paying salary monthly, these expenses become fixed cost. But when you are paying wages, this is known as the variable cost, because if you work, you will be paid. But if you pay monthly salary, even if you are on sick leave, the company must pay. Even if you are on vacation, the company will pay. And the difference will be there that if you are paying monthly, this is known as the fixed cost. And if you are paying weekly, daily, hourly, this is known as variable cost. And in developed countries, labor cost is variable, but in Bangladesh and also in third world countries, the labor cost is fixed, because the garments employees in our country are paid on monthly basis. So what you will include here, you will check whether the employees are working in the factory or not. If they are working in the factory, then this is known as the direct labor. You will include as the direct labor. And you will check whether they are directly involved. Without their presence, the production process cannot run. They are the direct labor. And indirect labor is manufacturing overhead, factory overhead. And what is that? The laborers who are working in the factory, but without them, the production process can run. This is known as the indirect labor, and there is factory overhead. So am I clear?
স্যার তাহলে সব ক্ষেত্রে তো আমরা তাহলে ওয়েজেস হোক আর স্যালারি হোক, সব ক্ষেত্রে তো আমরা সেটা যে ওভারহেডে
Direct labor,
অ্যাড
direct
করবো, তাই
labor
না?
is no, not overhead.
ওকে স্যার,
Direct labor. Overhead is different thing. Overhead means those other than direct materials and direct labor. All everything is overhead. Factory overhead, manufacturing overhead. All right. So three components will include. One is direct materials, another is direct labor, another is factory overhead. And you will follow our book, because the book is written by following the accounting principles. All right. So any other issues? If there is no more issues, then we can move to another discussion. And maybe you can check this example. Can you calculate the manufacturing cost per unit? Can you prepare a cost sheet? Manufacturing cost per unit and profit per unit if sales price is $35. Can you calculate? So now calculate, everybody. I'll ask you questions. That will be your participation in the class.